In 1951, the skies over Korea thundered with jet engines. The future had arrived, leaving piston warplanes for dead. But then came the Douglas A-1 Skyraider, a slow, battered relic that could haul more bombs than a B-17 and loiter above battlefields for 7 hours at a stretch. Jets were faster, sleeker, untouchable, or so everyone believed. Yet this old-school beast would go on to outfight, and even outlast, the very jets meant to replace it, earning nicknames like Flying Dump Truck and Speed. How did the last great prop plane become the jet age's most feared survivor? The answer begins with a design paradox that changed everything. In 1944, as the Second World War raged across Europe and the Pacific, Navy planners faced a problem jets couldn't solve. They needed a carrier-based bomber that could fly long distances, soak up punishment, and deliver more firepower than anything the fleet had ever seen. The call went out for a new kind of attack plane, one that could carry a heavier load than the legendary B-17, but operate from the pitching decks of aircraft carriers. Ed Heinemann, chief designer at Douglas Aircraft, took the challenge personally. He wasn't interested in building the fastest airplane. He wanted the most useful one. Heinemann's team sketched out a single-seat brute with a massive radial engine, wings built for strength, and a frame that could take a beating. The Navy called it the XBT-D1. The engineers just called it a flying dump truck. The prototype rolled out of the Douglas plant in January 1945. On March 18th, test pilot Laverne Brown lifted the XBT-2D1 into the California sky for its first flight. The numbers were staggering for a prop plane. A Wright R-3350 engine pumping out nearly 2,800 horsepower, the promise of carrying more than 8,000 pounds of bombs, and the ability to stay airborne for over 6 hours. Everything about the design was a paradox. The world was rushing toward speed, but Heinemann doubled down on payload and range. The result was an airplane that looked old-fashioned even as it left the factory, with a long nose, broad wings, and a cockpit armored like a bank vault. It was slow, but it could outlast and outcarry almost anything in the sky. Crews started calling it the SPAD after a World War I biplane, and the Flying Dump Truck, names that stuck long after the war ended. By the time the war in Europe was over, the Skyraider was ready. But history had other plans. The jet age was coming fast, and this new beast would have to prove itself on a very different battlefield. The Skyraider's silhouette told only half the story. Underneath those broad, straight wings hid a secret. 15 hardpoints, each one ready to carry a bomb, rocket, fuel tank, or even a torpedo. That was more than any other single-seat aircraft of its time. More, in fact, than some 4-engine bombers from the last war. The engineers at Douglas didn't just bolt on pylons wherever they fit. They built a lattice of reinforced spars and ribs, distributing the weight so the plane could haul an astonishing mix of ordnance. It wasn't just about brute force, it was about flexibility. One mission might call for a dozen 500-pound bombs. The next, a cocktail of rockets, flares, and fuel tanks for a rescue escort. Armor became the Skyraider's second skin. Sheets of steel wrapped the cockpit and vital systems, shielding the pilot from ground fire and shrapnel. The engine sat behind a massive cowling, with armor plates guarding the oil coolers and fuel lines. Even the control cables were routed to avoid a single lucky hit bringing the plane down. Mechanics called it bulletproof, not as a boast, but as a daily reality. The landing gear told its own story. Oversized, rugged, and spaced wide apart, the wheels could absorb the punishment of carrier landings loaded with thousands of pounds of bombs. Folding wings locked in place with thick steel pins designed to withstand the vibration of hours in the air and the jolt of an arrested landing. Every inch of the Skyraider's structure spoke to a single idea: survival. Not just for the pilot, but for the mission. No matter how rough the weather, how heavy the load, or how fierce the enemy fire. It was a flying contradiction, a slow-moving, propeller-driven machine built to outlast the jets. The paradox ran deeper than its looks. This was a plane designed to do the impossible and to keep coming back for more. Carrier decks in the summer of 1950 became a stage for something no one had seen before. Crews hustled beneath the shadow of Skyraiders, stacking bombs until the wings seemed to sag under the weight. The official logs from USS Valley Forge and USS Philippine Sea recorded single-seat planes launching with combat loads that stunned even veteran deck officers. 8,000, sometimes 9,000 pounds of bombs, rockets, and napalm. By comparison, the celebrated B-17 flying fortress of World War II usually carried 6,000 pounds on a mission, sometimes a bit more if the target was close. Yet here was a single pilot, throttling up a piston engine, dragging more ordnance into the air than a 4-engine bomber from the last war. The process was a ballet of danger and precision. Armorers clipped fuses, wired bombs, and checked racks, while pilots paced the catwalks, glancing at their payload charts. A Skyraider, fully loaded, looked almost comical. Wingtips drooping, tires bulging, propeller spinning against the salty wind. But the numbers didn't lie. The maximum design limit, 14,500 pounds, stood as a kind of dare, and while most combat missions launched with less, the sight of a Spad lumbering off the deck, bristling with bombs, became legend among carrier crews. Pilots described the takeoff roll as a leap of faith. The deck officer would signal, the engine would roar, and the Skyraider would claw its way into the sky, sometimes shedding spray as the wheels left the last feet of steel. On board, the pilot watched the airspeed needle with a silent prayer, feeling every pound of steel and high explosive straining behind him. Once airborne, the plane's true character revealed itself, slow, steady, and utterly relentless. It could circle a battlefield for hours, waiting for a target, or come back around for a second, third, even fourth pass, while the jets had already returned to base for fuel. No other attack plane in the fleet could match it. The Skyraider didn't just haul more bombs than a B-17. It delivered them with the patience and persistence that close support demanded. For the first time, the enemy faced a propeller-driven monster that could rain destruction all afternoon, then limp home with empty racks and a battered fuselage. The message was clear. The age of the jet might have arrived, but on the front lines, brute force and staying power still ruled the day. Out on the Korean peninsula, the Skyraider's reputation was forged at treetop height. Infantrymen and forward observers learned to listen for the deep, throaty rumble of its radial engine. Because when the sky filled with that sound, hope tended to follow. After-action reports from the Pusan perimeter describe battered platoons pinned down by North Korean tanks, only to watch as a single Skyraider swept in low, napalm canisters tumbling from its wings. The effect was instant and devastating. Enemy columns vanished in sheets of fire, and the pressure on the ground broke in seconds. Commanders wrote in their logs that no other plane could stay overhead as long or hit as hard. While jets flashed past and disappeared, the Skyraider circled, radio tuned to the ground, waiting for the next call. It wasn't unusual for a pilot to make 4 or 5 attack runs in a single mission, shifting from bombs to rockets, then to cannon fire, each pass called in by troops who could see the whites of enemy eyes. One Marine company, trapped near the Noctong River, credited a pair of Skyraiders with saving their position, flying so low and so slow that pilots could spot foxholes and adjust their aim by hand. The plane's endurance became a lifeline. Forward air controllers described it as stubborn, refusing to leave until the last threat was gone. Mechanics patched up Skyraiders riddled with holes, sometimes counting over 100 hits in a single airframe. But the aircraft came back, and so did the pilots. One Army lieutenant wrote home, "If you're in trouble, you pray for a Spad." The Skyraider's presence on the radio meant you had a fighting chance to see another sunrise. By the end of the Korean War, the Skyraider had built a legend on the front lines, one measured not just in tons of bombs dropped, but in the number of battered, grateful soldiers who walked away from battles they were never supposed to survive. The Vietnam War turned the Skyraider into something more than a bomber. It became the guardian angel of the rescue mission. When a pilot went down behind enemy lines, the call went out for Sandy. That was the Skyraider's new name on the radio, and to every airman stranded in the jungle, it meant hope was coming. The rescue game was deadly simple. Get in, get the survivor, get out before the enemy closed in. But the difference between life and death often came down to the Skyraider's ability to shield the helicopters. Sandy missions ran with a rhythm all their own. The lead Skyraider, Sandy 1, would orbit low, eyes locked on the ground, searching for smoke, mirror flashes, or a desperate radio call. Higher up, Sandy 2 and 3 circled, scanning for threats, ready to pounce on enemy gun positions. The helicopters, jolly green giants, waited at a safe distance until Sandy Low cleared the way. When the order came, they dropped into the landing zone, trusting the Skyraiders to keep the enemy's heads down. Each rescue played out under a wall of noise, the Skyraider's radial engine roaring overhead, 4 20mm cannons spitting fire, rockets and cluster bombs tearing apart tree lines. The plane could stay on station for hours, sometimes circling until fuel gauges ran dry. Pilots called it the sound of hope. Downed airmen wrote in their journals that hearing that engine meant they were going to live. Coordination was everything. The radios crackled with terse instructions, Sandy 1 marking targets with smoke, Sandy High calling in helicopter runs, everyone watching the clock and the fuel. Sometimes the Skyraider would make a dozen passes, each one drawing fire away from the hovering chopper. The enemy knew the pattern, but the Skyraider's armor and stubborn presence forced them back again and again. Helicopter crews later said they would never have dared a rescue without a Sandy overhead. For the men on the ground, that slow, throaty engine was more than just cover. It was a promise that someone was fighting to bring them home. On March 10, 1966, a battered Skyraider circled low over the A Shau Valley, its pilot searching for any sign of life through the smoke. The valley was a shooting gallery, ringed by enemy guns. On the ground, Captain Jump Myers was pinned down, his aircraft wrecked and the jungle closing in. Major Bernard Fisher, flying A-1E serial number 52-132-649, heard the call. He knew what was at stake. Without hesitating, Fisher brought his Skyraider down onto the muddy strip, bullets tearing into the wings and fuselage. He found Myers, hauled him into the cockpit, and pushed the throttle forward. The Skyraider clawed back into the air, riddled with holes, but alive. Later, mechanics counted dozens of bullet strikes, fuel tank punctured, wing peppered, engine cowling scarred. The plane was patched up and flew again. Fisher received the Medal of Honor, but he always said he just did what the Skyraider was built to do: take punishment and bring its people home. But the Skyraider's legend wasn't just earned by saving lives. On June 20th, 1965, 4 A-1s from VA-25 were flying cover over North Vietnam when 2 MiG-17s swept in, banking hard for an attack. Lieutenant Clinton Johnson and Lieutenant Charles Hartman broke away, forcing the jets into a low-altitude turning fight. The MiGs had speed, but the Skyraiders could outturn them at low level. Johnson waited for the right moment, squeezed the trigger, and his 20mm cannons stitched the MiG's wing. Gun camera footage caught the jet spiraling down, smoke trailing. It was the first time in the Vietnam War that a piston-engine plane had shot down a jet. The news shot through Navy and Air Force squadrons like a jolt of electricity. Suddenly, the slow, heavy Skyraider, the flying dump truck, was a jet killer. Pilots like Fisher, Johnson, and Hartman became folk heroes. Their stories passed from ready room to ready room. The Skyraider was no relic. It was a survivor, a protector, and on the right day, a slayer of jets. For every man rescued and every enemy surprised, the legend only grew. By the late 1950s, the Skyraider's reputation had spread far beyond American carrier decks. In Algeria, the French Aéronavale pressed the Skyraider into counterinsurgency service, flying missions from dusty airstrips and rough forward bases. Between 1957 and 1962, French pilots relied on its heavy punch and resilience, logging thousands of sorties against dug-in guerrilla fighters. The Skyraider's ability to carry a mixed load, rockets, bombs, napalm, even supplies for ground troops, gave commanders a tool that jets simply couldn't match in rough terrain and unpredictable weather. Pilots described the aircraft as ironclad, shrugging off ground fire and returning home with battered wings and punctured fuselage panels. Half a world away, South Vietnamese crews took the controls as the war in Southeast Asia escalated. The Republic of Vietnam Air Force flew Skyraiders in combat right up to 1975, using them for close air support, interdiction, and rescue escort. These pilots learned the same lessons as their American and French counterparts. The Skyraider could loiter for hours, absorb punishment, and deliver firepower with precision. Mission logs from the final years of the war show Skyraiders launching again and again, even as newer jets vanished from the skies. For Allied air forces, the old prop plane became a symbol of trust, a workhorse that kept flying, no matter how the battle shifted or who was at the controls. Decades after its final combat missions, the Skyraider's DNA still lingers in the bones of the world's most feared attack planes. When engineers at Fairchild Republic began sketching out the A-10 Thunderbolt II in the late 1960s, they studied what made the Skyraider so trusted by ground troops: armor thick enough to shrug off enemy fire, a cockpit built like a bunker, and the ability to loiter above the battlefield long after sleeker jets had to turn for home. The A-10's designers borrowed more than just ideas. They pored over after-action reports from Skyraider pilots, noting how a slow, tough machine could make the difference between a lost rescue and a man brought home alive. The doctrine of close air support, flying low, delivering punishing fire, and staying until the job was done, traces a direct line from the Spad to the Warthog. Today, the Skyraider's legacy isn't just found in blueprints or textbooks. It lives on at air shows and museums, where about 20 airworthy survivors still thunder down the runway, their engines rattling windows and stirring memories. Restoration crews sweat over battered airframes, hunting for original parts and poring through faded logbooks, determined to keep the legend alive. Some Skyraiders still bear the scars of combat, patched bullet holes, faded nose art, stories etched in metal. Pilots and fans gather to watch these warbirds fly, drawn by the same awe that once gripped soldiers on the ground. The Skyraider endures not just as a relic, but as a living reminder that sometimes brute strength and stubbornness can outlast even the march of progress. The Douglas A-1 Skyraider first flew on March 18, 1945, and entered service too late for World War II, but it went on to carry up to 14,500 pounds of ordnance, surpassing the B-17's standard bomb load. Across Korea and Vietnam, its 7-hour loiter time and legendary rescue missions saved countless lives, as confirmed by after-action reports and pilot testimonies. Despite facing faster jets, Skyraider crews scored air-to-air victories, with gun camera footage from June 20, 1965, proving a MiG-17 kill. Yet, many operational details from classified mission records remain unreleased, and some missions' full impact is still debated by historians. Today, only about 20 Skyraiders remain airworthy, but the A-10's design and close air support doctrine bear its unmistakable influence. The facts show that brute strength and persistence sometimes outlast speed and technology. The Skyraider's legacy endures, not as an artifact, but as evidence of what determination and purposeful engineering can achieve.